Okay, right, what is going on everybody? Welcome back to the channel and another workout walkthrough. That is right, it is leg day, a huge quads workout I'm about to walk you through and take you through obviously my quads workout itself, the exercises, the sets that I do, the reps that I do, but as well my top tips for each exercise, execution techniques, setup tips, and just general mental cues that are going to transform the way that you perform the exercises and therefore give you the best opportunity to grow those tree trunk legs and really progress and transform your leg development. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Right, so for exercise 1 we have the leg extension. My setup on here is a 4x15 pyramid and up in weight. So the pyramid style of training goes like this: we start at the lightest and end at the heaviest weight, and we fail on that top set. We want to classify all the sets realistically as working sets. Maybe the first 1 or 2 will be light and primers, so we warm up a little bit into the movement, get used to the movement pattern, and prime ourselves for the following 2-3 sets where we really start to work and then of course fail on the final set. Why the leg extension first? The leg extension is an isolation movement, and obviously we're going to be moving into heavier, more loading movements such as our squatting patterns and our leg presses following on from the leg extension. But what we want to do is really warm up and use this isolation movement to create a mind to muscle connection, which is going to allow us to use our quads a lot more effectively in the following exercises, because the leg extension is going to really get some blood into the quads, and therefore when we move into our squats, our leg presses, we are more likely to use the quads as our primary mover and driver of the movement. As the blood is already there, we're mentally connected with that muscle, and therefore we will give ourselves the best opportunity to grow that muscle and stimulate that muscle in our training. Also, for safety and injury prevention, what are the 2 main things that hinder you from making progress in your heavier lifts? Firstly, knee pain. Secondly, back pain and the lower back pump. How does the leg extension stop our knees from hurting in our squats? Firstly, I mentioned about getting blood into the muscle and warming it up. Secondly, the leg extension movement is a great way to get some fluid in the joint and get our knees used to flexing and extending through obviously an extension before we really load up our squatting patterns. And then the same thing applies to our lower back. The main reason why our lower back may hurt in a squatting pattern is because our hips are stiff, our hips are tight. If you are leaving your ego at the door and not overloading and putting too many plates on your squat just to stroke your strength or lack of. Following an adequate warm up away from your training, we warm up the hips, we use the leg extension to warm up our quads and our knees. We can then move into our heavier movements pain-free and actually using the correct muscle that we're trying to grow, the quads. We know why we're using the leg extension, but how do we do it and why do we do it to get the best out of our quads? The leg extension is probably the best exercise to load the quad in the shortened range. So when your leg is fully extended, your knee is fully extended. If you think about it, your squat at the top of the movement, the load is lighter and you're using your hips to carry some of the load at the top of the movement. So there's a resistance drop off as you progress the rep. Leg press, same thing. You'll find that as you perform a leg press, it gets lighter as you perform the press and get short. So if our heavier movements are heavier in the lengthened and lighter as we perform them, how are we going to load in the shortened range, in the fully flexed position? Through the quad extension. So what we can do on this prime kit especially is really load in that flex position, really fatigue our muscle in the shortened range, and then when we are still fresher in that lengthened range, we can apply the squats, presses to stimulate the muscle in that way and get in a more holistic approach to leg training. But of course this can be applied with any machine. This is by making sure to exaggerate your concentric contraction, exaggerate the squeeze at the top of the movement. Don't just fling the weight up and drop straight back down again. You contract, slight pause, really squeeze the muscle, and then obviously you control your eccentric. That brings me on to my next point, controlling the changes of direction. So exaggerating the squeeze, and then we slowly perform the eccentric, keeping constant tension on the muscle. The more constant the tension is, the more stimulated the muscle becomes, and therefore it gives us the best opportunity to grow. Same applies in the fully lengthened range. We come down all the way down on our leg extension and we pause again. We don't use the stretch reflex response to give us a boost and power us out of the movement, as this of course takes tension off of the intended muscle. When it comes to fully flexing the quad, a good mental cue that I've implemented into my own training to maximize my leg growth is to think about flexing the quad at the top of the hip, not down the bottom where your teardrop is, not by the knee. You want to really think about flexing at the top of your quad. And this mental cue has been transformative to my training. It really allows me to fully contract on each of my reps and therefore get the most out of the leg extension. Another drawback that you may see on the leg extension is people throwing their body around as they perform the reps. A way to stop this is to pull yourself into the machine. By pulling yourself into the machine, you're creating that external brace and keeping yourself tight and compact, meaning the only thing that should be moving is flexion and extension of the knee, the leg extension, and your legs moving as you perform the rep. You don't want to have your hips shifting, your lower back arching and caving as we perform the rep. So you pull yourself in, keep your hips tight, and really drive through the quad, thinking about flexing it at the top of the quad, at the top of your contractions. Okay, so we've covered the crux of why we perform the leg extension first and how to get the most out of your leg extension. So now we move on to the fun part, and that is of course our squatting patterns. First off is the hack squat. If I had to pick one movement to perform for legs for the rest of my life, it would probably be the hack squat. You can load it up, you can feel good, and it is just so brutal. I absolutely love this movement. A 5x10 here, same style, pyramiding up in weight and failing on the top set. There are a few things that you want to consider when it comes to squatting patterns and the hack squat in particular. Firstly is your foot placement. The general principle of leg training is the more that the knee flexes, the more that the knee bends, the more stimulus that the quad is going to get. So more knee flexion equals better quad growth, to put it simply. So what we want to do to achieve this is have our feet as low down on the foot plate as possible before our heels elevate. If you go right down the bottom and you don't have the adequate ankle flexion to perform it, you'll find your heels elevate and you go onto your tiptoes. That is not what we want to do here, because that is going to put unnecessary strain on the knee joint and our calf muscles, therefore taking the tension away from the quads. If you go far down and your heels elevate, take a little step up and up until you can comfortably perform the rep all the way down, keeping attention on your midfoot. We're not driving too much through the heels, as this is going to encourage our adductors and glutes to take over the movement, and we're not pushing through our toes, as this is going to put unnecessary strain on the knees and calves like I mentioned before. So midfoot tension, whole foot on the plate, no heels or toes elevating as we perform the rep, and that is your position. Obviously it varies from person to person, but the general principle is lower down equals more growth. The reason why I am slightly up is because I am wearing heel elevated lifting shoes, squat shoes. So this puts my foot like this to begin with, allowing for more comfortable ankle flexion. Obviously ankle flexion is going to be a big limiting factor to your squats. If you can't flex your ankle and you have a lack of ankle mobility, you will be very uncomfortable getting into the deeper ranges of your squats, getting your arse to the grass, as the saying goes. Due to this, I'm naturally elevated, so I have to take a little bit further up to not go onto my tiptoes as I perform the rep. So we've spoken about knee flexion, and I'll give you another saying: knees over toes is what grows. When you perform the squatting pattern, you want to have your knees come over your toes. Why? Because more ankle flexion, the more that your ankle comes forward, bringing your knee over your toe, the more your knee can actually bend. And like I mentioned before, the more the knee flexion that you get, the greater lengthening of the quad you'll get, and therefore you're giving yourself the best opportunity to grow your legs. So we've covered everything from the waist down. Next, we incorporate the waist. So why does our waist and our midsection impact our leg growth? Because you want to brace your core. Hips and core braced so that we're not arching backwards trying to struggle up the rep because we're losing force, so we're actually weaker. You may think that struggling around is going to get you that 1 rep max. It is actually making you weaker and putting you in a compromising position to get more lower back pain and more knee pain, like I mentioned in the leg extension clip. So you brace your core, take a deep breath, brace your core, make yourself as compact as possible. The tighter your core and the more braced you are, keeping your lower back against the pad, you are able to generate more force at the bottom of the movement and drive through your quads. The aim of the game is to create as much tension in the quad as possible. Mechanical tension is going to stimulate the muscle better and therefore grow bigger legs. So by keeping everything else compact, tight, braced and fixed, and the only thing moving is the knee flexion and our ankles, allowing our quads to be the only thing that really changes its position as we perform the rep, it only stands to reason that that's where all the tension and the stimulus is going to be placed. And like I said, more tension, more stimulus, more growth. The same applies to our arms. You may be thinking, how on earth does our arms and where we put our arms impact our leg training? I was having this conversation the other day, and it leads on from the brace core. You you don't only brace your core, you want to brace your entire body. Like I mentioned with keeping everything compact, holding onto the machine. You don't want to be loose and you don't want to be pulling down, because if you pull down, you end up crunching. What does crunching do? Takes your back off the pad. What does taking your back off the pad do? Ruins your brace. So back against the pad, core braced, and with your arms, you want to, if anything, slightly push upwards, but keep your elbows tucked and keep your body compact. Elbows tucked, body compact, slightly push upwards, because you're not going to realistically shoulder press the hack squat. If you can shoulder press more than you can hack squat, there's a bigger issue. So a little bit of force going up so that we can keep our spine more neutral, prevent injury, and then we're coming down with the braced core and the braced arms and driving up as we perform the hack squat movement. Trust me on this one, brace your arms and don't pull down, don't leave yourself limp, keep yourself tight, compact, fixed, and if anything, give it a little nudge upwards and you're going to see your hack squat transform. You'll be hitting all new strength fees and getting bigger legs as a result. Okay, you may be thinking, oh, the hack squat is so brutal, I'm so glad that the squats are done. No, we are back to back squatting. That is right, it's a higher volume leg workout, and the next exercise is the pendulum squat. It is back in. I was running the hip press for a very long while, but now I'm back on the pendulum squat and it has been a dream to my leg development. 5 by 10 again. You can see that in both my squatting patterns that my feet are quite narrow and closer together. This is because as we come further apart, we are encouraging the inside of our leg, our adductors, to work. This is completely person dependent. See how you comfortably get into the deepest portion of the squat, as the depth and control of the changes of direction are the most important factors to your leg development, as opposed to the more niche factors such as foot placement in terms of stance. Don't stand stupidly wide out because you are just going to be glute driving, and don't stand too close together because you are just going to be uncomfortable in the length and range. Find what works for you. More narrow is going to encourage more quads, and then if you find you're uncomfortable, just take a step outwards, and then as you keep stepping outwards, you'll find your comfortable position. So you'll see that I've got a other bit of equipment on the equipment. I've banded in a foam roller at the top. This is just because, like I mentioned with the hack squat, you want your lower back to be placed firmly against the back pad. And what I have found, as the pendulum back pad is straight but the machine curves, and if you can imagine, as you come down and it curves, it doesn't actually really align too well. With me personally, you may be fine, but having that something just to push me a little bit further forward and encourage and almost force my back against the pad, it's just allowed me to more comfortably perform that squat. And if you can more comfortably perform and have no issues in your back, like lower back pumps, you're going to be able to stay in the squat for longer and lift more weight, perform more reps, and actually fail with your quads, and not just because your back is screaming at you. So that is the reason for that. The same principles apply as the hack squat. We are as far down as we can without our heels leaving the foot plate. We're narrower to encourage our quads. We're braced in our core, keeping our hips tight and fixed and not letting our lower back come off of the pad. Like I mentioned, you can't necessarily push up against the pendulum squat like you can on the hack unless you hold it here, I guess, but then it is very uncomfortable and you're unsafe without a spotter to re-rack you. Just make sure that you're not, again, pulling down on yourself, closing yourself off and creating counterforce against the way you're trying to push. If you're trying to squat up but you're pulling down, you're going to be contradicting where your body wants to go and therefore making your set less effective performing a pendulum squat. You'll see in both of my squatting patterns that I don't lock out at my knees. I don't come to the top and really straighten my legs, as this just puts the tension onto our hips and our knees. By coming up the majority of the way, fully coming up and just not locking out at the top, it keeps the tension more constant. This is a training principle that I apply to all of my lifts. When I press, I don't lock out at the elbows. When I curl, I don't lock out at the elbows. For example, obviously when you extend and lock out at the elbows, and when you row, you really retract your scapula. But when it comes to locking out in positions that take tension off as opposed to place more tension on, this is where I avoid that last little bit of the movement, keep the tension more constant, provide a greater stimulus for the quads and give them the best opportunity to grow. As you can tell, when I got off, I had a glimpse of death itself and my whole body was reverberating. That was a savage top set. Okay, so we move on to our final quads portion of the quads workout. There's a following exercise after this, but this is the last quad exercise, and that is the squat press. This time only a 2-set exercise with 1 straight set and 1 def set. I'll call it a def set. It is a JDH trademark set, which I'll cover in just a second, but the first one, 10 to 15 reps. What I have changed about my leg pressing that has encouraged the most growth is, of course, equals depth. And like I said, more knee flexion equals more growth. The deeper you go, the more you'll grow. That is how you should remember leg training. If you take one thing away from the video, it will be this: the deeper you go, the more you'll grow. So I'm coming back, but I'm coming back through my quads, through knee flexion. I'm not letting my hips flex and then my bum coming off the seat. That is why I have the yoga block, because it makes for a more comfortable brace. I can pull myself into the machine, like I mentioned with the leg extension, like I mentioned with pulling yourself into the hack squat. I pull myself into the leg press, which means my bum is firmly placed against the seat and isn't encouraged to elevate. And by keeping tight, I can really focus on my knees flexing and extending being the only driver and only thing that moves in the squat press. So that being said, we're coming as far back as we can, foot far down on the foot plate to the point where our heels don't elevate, of course. And then I'm coming back and really get as much flexion through my knee as possible. The deeper you go, the more you'll grow. You see, I perform a slight pause at the bottom. Like I mentioned with the flex reflex response in the leg extensions, we're not using momentum just to bounce back out of the hole and drive the weight upwards. The leg press is heavier in this length and range, so why would we want to neglect that? We grow more muscle in the eccentric portion of the exercise, and our muscles in general get better stimulus in the length and range. So if we're coming back and just bouncing straight out, you're neglecting the most important half of the movement, the eccentric, and also the utmost important part of training in general, and that is getting tension in the length and range, getting tension at the bottom of the movement, spending some time with our muscle fully extended before we flex it. Further to this, pauses in the changes of direction is actually going to be safer. We're going to keep more tension on the muscle itself, keep tension off of the joints, and also snappier movements are going to be detrimental to your longevity in the sport, as it is going to encourage muscular tears, and the last thing you want to do is tear your quad off the bone with half a ton of weight on top of you. Of course, I have stripped my weight down and I'm not on the half a ton yet, but my legs are bigger because of it. Lifting less and growing more, that is because we're stimulating more by keeping the tension more effectively on the target muscle. Again, bracing, keeping our core tight as well as putting ourselves into the movement. Breathing is going to be imperative to exercises that are heavier. This is a very heavy exercise on the nervous system. It's going to be taxing, it's going to be fatiguing to your central nervous system. So it is going to be very hard to maintain if you don't breathe correctly and sync your breathing with your brace. If you try and breathe while your brace is fully contracted and fully tight, you will feel like you're suffocating. If you try and brace mid-breath, you will lose your brace and you'll hurt yourself. So what I do is I come down, I breathe out, and as I get midway through the eccentric, I'll take a deep breath, reaffirm my brace, spend a second in the length and range, and then blow out as I perform the rep and probably give a big old grunt as I do it. And when I get to the top, I'll reaffirm my brace and then repeat. Brace is tight. I perform the eccentric. I take my breath. I reaffirm my brace, get deep, and there we go. That's a very good representation. And then as you saw, I had a nice outer body experience as I re-racked. Then we move on to set 2. Like I mentioned, it is a JDH def set. This is a rest pause into a drop set. So I perform a set aiming for the 12 to 15 mark. I rack, leaving maybe, if I could get another rep, but it's a 50-50, I'll leave that in the tank. Count to 30 and then go again. That is the rest pause part. Go to failure where I can't get any more this time. Once I achieve this, I take a bit of weight off, go again till failure, take a bit of weight off, and then finish. So it's a 3-stage drop set with a rest pause in between. And this brings me on to the reason why I train so high volume. I have found personally that training legs at a higher volume has been conducive to their growth. Not only in terms of rep volume itself and training the higher rep ranges such as the 10 mark, and I mentioned there the 15 on the leg extension and the 15 on my second set on the squat press, but also in the set volume. You can see I had a 4x15, a 5x10, a 5x10, and this time is only the 2, just because we have accrued a lot of volume on the way. We still want to move a good amount of weight on the leg press because it is a heavy loading exercise, the exercise where you can load it the most and get the most mechanical tension through your quads. So we just perform the warm-up sets portion of the pyramid, a null and void at this point almost, as we've done a lot of squatting patterns. We're primed ready for this sort of movement, and therefore we can just touch up a little bit for safety's sake, a couple of reps in between, prime, and then go. And then of course the finishing finishing set is a finisher. It is a absolute finisher, nail in the coffin finisher, that is for sure. And what higher volume allows you to do is actually use your muscles a lot more. Because you can lift heavier in general on your leg days, you can put more plates on a hack squat than you can a bench press. You can put more plates on a leg press than probably all of the rest of your exercises combined if you wanted to quarter rep your way to sore knees and no quads. So by having this much volume, it stimulates the quads and gets a great mind to muscle connection to allow you to use them better under heavier loads, and then also kind of takes away the urge to ego lift because you are so pumped that you feel you really can't stick 700 kilos on a leg press after 10 sets of squatting patterns and 4 sets of leg extensions. So it is a win-win. You don't have to spend half an hour racking and unracking the leg press after doing your top set of 4 reps, quarter reps, grunting more than you're straining, and you can grow bigger quads. So that is that. And then lastly, we have adductors. I mentioned that we finished the quads portion, but it's a quads workout, and to neglect your adductors is probably going to be the biggest mistake that you'll make to your leg training, as the inside of your leg is the majority your adductor. Therefore, if you neglect it, you'll have nice legs on the outside and a straight line down the middle and just have a very peculiar looking thigh gap. And who doesn't want to fill up as much space as possible when you're trying to get as big as possible? It's no good being Johnny Bravo big and then having decent X-frame on your legs if the inside of your legs looks like you've never stepped in the gym. How do I do my adductors? The adductor machine, as you can see, 4x15, similar to the leg press, making sure to control the changes of direction. Flex, hold there for a second, really come back and focus on fighting against the weight with your adductors, as if you just let the abduction occur, you're going to just use your hips and your glutes, take tension off your adductors and make the eccentric portion of the movement null and void, give yourself some sore hips and not grow any legs as a result. So squeeze, exaggerate the squeeze, control the change in direction, slow eccentric, keeping attention on the adductors, coming as far back as we can before, like I said, our hips start to roll, and take tension off them, pause and go again. A great way to make sure that the tension stays on your adductors is to turn your legs out slightly and flex your adductors upwards. What this will allow you to do is create a little bit of an isometric contraction in your adductors before you perform the set. So if they're already flexed, it stands to reason that they're going to be more likely to contribute more to the movement. So a little bit of flexion, adductors turn upwards, not planting our feet too firmly, as this will encourage us to drive the tension through our knees and our calves. You'll find if you're doing it this way, your knees and your shins will hurt more than your adductor. So turn your adductor upwards, kind of let your feet roam loose, and then just drive through kind of like the teardrop portion of your leg, and this will allow you to use the adductor more effectively in this exercise. So that is my full current quad workout and how I have been able to blow up my legs. I hope you found these useful. If you did, be sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, click that notification bell so you don't miss when we upload. I do similar sort of walkthroughs for all muscle groups and all of my training, as well as some weekly vlogs to take you through my personal journey in physique development and bodybuilding, and then some other videos here and there as we see fit. So like I said, hope you do enjoy. Share this video to a friend so we can all grow massive legs together, and I will catch you in the next one.